Part 2 of Sectionalism, a House Divided. Violence in the Senate. Senator Charles Sumner gave an impassioned speech for the abolition of slavery, and in the speech he belittled South Carolina Senator Andrew Butler. And South Carolina Senator Andrew Butler's nephew happened to be a congressman, and his name was Preston S. Brooks. He enters the Senate, and then he repeatedly hits Sumner over the head with his cane. He became somewhat of a folk hero, and he received thousands of canes from Southerners saying, "Take it to him." New political parties emerged. Slavery is going to divide the Whigs. Franklin Pierce is a Democrat, and he will win the White House in 1852 because it is split. We need to know what nativism is. This is the favoring of native-born people over immigrants, so we're not going to be nice to immigrants here in this time period in the early half of the 1800s. The Know Nothing Party was founded in 1854. It did well in the 1854 elections, but they're going to split over slavery as well. The reason they were known as the Know Nothing Party, they were a nativist party, and when you would ask them what they stood for, they just said, "I know nothing." But they stood for basically nativism, favoring American-born people over immigrants. The Free Soil Party in 1848, they opposed the extension of slavery into the territories for an interesting reason which we haven't talked about, but back in the day it was a hot topic, and that is they opposed slavery not for moral reasons but for economic reasons. As you see, white wage earners had to compete with slaves, and it's hurting the northern economy, so they said, get rid of slavery so we can pay workers. So paid workers don't have to, they're not competing with slave labor. The Republican Party, the modern day Republican Party, it forms in July of 1854, and as you see, they drew from Whigs, Democrats, nativists, mainly from the North, commercial and small farmers, and they had the temperance movement with them as well. And they agree on two things. They did not like the Kansas-Nebraska Act. They opposed it because of popular sovereignty, and they wanted to keep slavery out of the territories. How would they keep slavery out of the territory? They felt like they could pass a law, a federal law, a bill signed by Congress and then signed into law by the president. So that's how they were going to go about it, federal legislation. The election of 1856 saw James Buchanan. He showed that the candidate for president could win without alienating the South. So he did win states in the South. He had a lot of Southern friends. He won the North, but he won a lot of states in the South as well. He had allies, and he won 7 northern states and western states. He had a lot of Southern support, a lot of Southern friends, and Lincoln will not have that in 4 years. So here's the election of 1856. As you see, James Buchanan, he wins some states in the North. He wins some states in the South and the West. John C. Fremont, he's a free soiler and a Republican candidate in the North. Milner Fillmore is a Republican in the South. James Buchanan is the Democrat, and as you see, he was out of the nation during Bleeding Kansas, so he didn't know really what went on over there. So he didn't understand the divisions between he did understand the divisions between pro-slave and anti-slavery, but he didn't understand exactly what was going on in Kansas. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Slavery dominates politics. As you see, Buchanan ends up being very indecisive about slave-related issues. Really, in the 1850s, you have 2 presidents back-to-back that really did not deal with this stuff at all, and that would be Franklin Pierce and that would be James Buchanan. And if you look at Zachary Taylor and Milner Fillmore, I mean, Taylor didn't really deal with it either. So, I mean, you have a string of presidents here that are really going to be indecisive when it comes to slavery. And actually, it hurts Pierce and Buchanan to the point where they're the 2 most ineffective presidents in U.S. history as of 2020. They're the worst. So, or they're usually down at the bottom of the list. So, the Dred Scott v. Sanford case. Dred Scott was a slave in Missouri. His owner took him to free states, Wisconsin and Illinois. This was all staged. Dred Scott's master was a army doctor, and just to make a long story short, Remember, when you live in Missouri, you are a slave, but when you move north of Missouri, that would be in Wisconsin and Illinois, you're supposed to be free. There's no slavery slavery is not supposed to exist in the northern territories up there because of the Missouri Compromise. Scott claimed he was a free man. So the Supreme Court has a couple of questions to ask. So, was he a citizen? If he's not a citizen, he couldn't sue. Did residence in a free state make him free even though he returned to a slave state? So this ruling is going to also go at the Missouri Compromise. The Kansas-Nebraska Act will also make the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. Or it'll say, we've got a new law in place. So as you see here, this ruling was a hot topic of the day, and it's a failure of the Supreme Court in a lot of ways. The ruling was that Dred Scott was not a citizen. So if you're not a citizen, you can't sue. He's property, and property is protected by the Fifth Amendment. So the Missouri Compromise was ruled unconstitutional, so slave owners could take their slaves anywhere they wanted, even north. Okay, this is the first time since 1803 that the court had overturned a law passed by Congress. After the case, Dred Scott's owner set him and his family free. It was all staged. But here's a good History Channel review here of it in 3 minutes. You can check it out. Chief Roger B. Taney was appointed by Andrew Jackson in 1835. He's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He will have to listen to Lincoln. He swears Lincoln in 1860, and Lincoln goes on a rant about how unconstitutional that ruling was. So Roger B. Taney had to listen to Lincoln criticize him on Lincoln's inauguration day. The Lecompton Constitution in 1857. Kansas has to write a constitution, so you get the Kansas State Constitution debate. In response to the Topeka Constitution, which argues basically that Kansas will be a free state, this Lecompton Constitution is an attempt by outnumbered pro-slavery people in Kansas to get their constitution passed and join the Union and make it a slave state. Of course, it's voted down in the Kansas legislature. The reason we're talking about it is because the president's response to this was extremely bad. He endorses the Constitution, and he says it looks like a good Constitution. It should be Kansas' Constitution. He endorses the Constitution, upsets fellow Democrats, and in particular Stephen Douglas and the abolitionist wing of the Democratic Party, which, by the way, Kansas will adopt their fourth, I think it's their fourth Constitution they adopt. So Lincoln-Douglas debates. These debates basically set Lincoln up for the 1860 election. Lincoln will lose this Senate race to Stephen Douglas, but it helps unify his party in 1858, and basically the arguments are Lincoln felt that he needs to pass federal legislation to end slavery in the Western territories, not all together, but the Western territories. Stephen Douglas said popular sovereignty is the best course of action. Lincoln is a constitutional lawyer, and he will not one time utter the word end slavery in the South. He knows constitutionally he cannot do it because of the Fifth Amendment and property rights. So he's just wanting to pass a federal law to end slavery out west. Both want to end slavery, but they have different methods. So you get the Freeport Doctrine. Basically, Stephen Douglas said slavery cannot exist in an area unless it is supported by local police regulations. In other words, if the police don't enforce slavery, it can't happen. So in 1858, that's the year of debates. 1859 is the year of action. John Brown once again shows up in Harper's Ferry, Virginia today. I think it's West Virginia, but Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Brown studied slave revolts in Greece and Rome, and he felt that the time was right for a revolt in the U.S. So what he was going to do is raid the military arsenal or weapons depot at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, get weapons, and march through the South freeing slaves while issuing them weapons to fight. In other words, have a mass uprising. The plan doesn't go as planned, and he ends up being captured. There's a massive gun battle breakout. I think he lost 4 of his sons, and something like that. One of his sons died or something, but at this battle. But he's captured. He's convicted of treason and he's sentenced to death. So he's kind of like the archangel of the Civil War. He kind of brings this thing. They call him the meteor of the Civil War sometimes. He brings the Civil War to our front doorstep. Interestingly enough, though, here are three people who were present at John Brown's hanging. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and John Wilkes Booth were all present in the U.S. military. The election of Lincoln as president, as we see here, the Republican convention had William Seward, who becomes Secretary of State. He was the strong party favorite. The South viewed Lincoln as a black Republican. They feared him, and they saw him as the greatest evil of the Republican Party because he wanted to pass a federal law to end slavery in the West. And the South felt that if he could pass a law to end it in the West, he's just going to pass a law to end it in the South. So as you see here, the election of 1860, there are four candidates for office. Lincoln with the Republican Party, Stephen Douglas, a Northern Democrat. Southern Democrat would have been Vice President John Breckinridge, and Constitutional Union Party John Bell. Lincoln doesn't even show up on 10 of the Southern states' ballots, so you can't even vote for Lincoln if you wanted to if you were in the South, and Lincoln still wins the presidency. So the South felt like they had been alienated from this election, and they felt like that they didn't have a say. As you see, Lincoln's election will become the immediate cause to the Civil War, and here's how the states seceded. South Carolina secedes on December 20th. January, you see Mississippi becomes the second state. The 10th, Florida becomes the third state. Alabama becomes the fourth state. Georgia becomes the fifth state. Louisiana becomes the sixth state. In February, Texas becomes the seventh state. States to secede after Fort Sumter, that would be Virginia, April 17th. And then in May, you got Arkansas, North Carolina. And in June, you have Tennessee. However, look at the border states. These are states that have slavery, but they fight with the Union. That would be Delaware, Maryland, West Virginia, as of 1863 when West Virginia breaks off from Virginia, Kentucky, and Missouri. So February 4th, 1861, Confederate States of America is formed. They write a similar constitution to the Union's, two notable exceptions though. They protect slavery in the new territories, and each state was sovereign and independent. This would absolutely hamper Southern efforts to be successful. Jefferson Davis is absolutely the wrong president in this kind of system because he's a my way or the highway guy, instead of a consensus builder. So his efforts are going to hamper this government from being successful. And Lincoln finally is inaugurated on March 4th. And so on March 4th, he's inaugurated, and all this has happened before he takes over as president. So James Buchanan's hands were tied. He said it was illegal to secede, which he's right. There's nothing that says anything in the Constitution he can or can't do it. But he said it's illegal for him to do anything about it either, and he's right about that. Would the North allow the South to leave the Union without a fight? That's the question everybody has as of March 1861.